So this afternoon I've got to leave a little bit earlier because of the Charles and Camilla dinner. So can I start by announcing this weekend I'll leave for Vietnam, for the Philippines and Malaysia for a series of meetings aimed at boosting New Zealand's trade, political security links in the region. I'll lead a trade delegation to Vietnam and attend the East Asian Summit in Kuala Lumpur and the APEC leaders meeting in Manila. The Asia-Pacific region is a significant driver of global economic growth and a massive demand for New Zealand products. The opportunities for New Zealand are immense, and around 70% of our total trade taking place with APEC economies. It's important that we continue to build on those ties and create new opportunities to further diversify and strengthen our economy for the benefit of all Kiwis. In the Philippines, I'll meet with other APEC political leaders and address the APEC CEO Summit. The event's focus this year will be on SMEs as well as trade and services. The East Asian Summit in KL will focus on regional security, political and economic issues. We'll also celebrate the 40th anniversary of our relationship with ASEAN, our fourth largest trading partner, and I'll leave on Saturday and return on Monday the 23rd of November. This week in the House, the government intends to make progress on the International Finance Agreements Amendments Bill and the Taxation Bright Line for Residential Land Bill and Support for Children in Hardship Bill. In terms of my own activities, I'll be, as I say, meeting with Prince Charles in Auckland tonight and then a dinner with the royal couple and the Governor General. I'll be back in Wellington tomorrow, and on Wednesday I have a number of events in Christchurch on Thursday and in the Rodney area on Friday. And as I'm sure you're aware, one small technical announcement that of course Sia had her baby last week. Maxima Ann Aston / Warren, surname. Born at 8:31 p.m. on Friday the 6th, 8 pounds too. Maxi for sure.
On another note, have you had a briefing on the situation on Christmas Island?
Well, my office has had an update, I suppose is probably the better way of describing it. So we're obviously aware of what's taking place there. It's a difficult situation to get all the facts on. My understanding is that there could be a small number of New Zealanders actually involved, but we haven't been advised of any injuries to any New Zealanders.
Are you concerned that New Zealanders may have legally taken part in leading this?
Well, my concerns would be that, like a riot at any corrections facility, there can and may well be consequences as a result of that. Now, these are people who theoretically are staying on Christmas Island, choosing not to come back to New Zealand because we know, under the advice we've had from the Australian government, they could do that. Now the risk is that they actually damage their own appeals because they undertake other criminal activity when they're there. So, look, I don't know all the rights and wrongs of the issue, and I certainly haven't argued that New Zealanders should be sent to Christmas Island, in fact the opposite, but in the end it's hard to see how they're making their cases any better.
Have you spoken to Malcolm Turnbull about it?
I haven't, no.
Do you intend to speak to Malcolm Turnbull about
Look, I don't think so. It'll run through a proper process. I mean, any more than if there was a riot at Paremurumo and there were Australians locked up there, I doubt he'd be making a phone call over here. What we do say, though, to New Zealanders is if they have concerns, as we've said repeatedly in the past, they should contact us. We know that they're contacting people because they ring the Morning Report and they're contacting Calvin Davis. So it isn't like they don't have access to cell phone capability. They have legal representation and they have been making, statements or requests via that legal representation. But that's the proper way of doing this.
So you don't subscribe to the argument that they've sort of been forced into a corner effectively by being left out there, that they've rioted because they're frustrated at being detained?
Well, I don't know the arguments behind all of it, but what we do know, on the basis that we accept the Australians at their word, they're free to come back to New Zealand at any time. So they don't need to be in Christmas Island. They can get up, come to New Zealand and have their appeals processed from here. And one would have thought, if you left Christmas Island, came to New Zealand and appealed from New Zealand, you've got a much higher chance of getting a successful request as a result of that appeal than if you're actually involved in what could well be further criminal activity on Christmas Island.
Calvin Davis says New Zealand authorities should go to Christmas Island and check out conditions themselves. Are you prepared to send anyone to do that?
No. What I am prepared to do is provide support for those people if they want it, and to make sure that if they request to come home to New Zealand, that request is facilitated.
From what you've heard from the update that you've had, are you concerned for these New Zealanders' safety?
not sure all of those facts are right. I think because not everybody is involved, as I understand. There's one group of people, but I mean, again, if people want to get out of that situation, one would assume they can actually walk out of that situation. It's not the whole campus under lockdown, I don't think.
Are you worried that someone's died on there, this Iranian detainee? Does that?
Well, I don't know the details exactly. I mean, I've got advice that that's what triggered this thing off, but I just don't know all the details of what actually happened to the individual, how he fell, what caused his death.
But with 40 Kiwis there, shouldn't you be concerned about their safety and wanting to know what's going on?
I'm always concerned about New Zealanders, but they are in a corrections facility which actually they're free to leave, because we know that. That's the first point. They're staying there voluntarily. They are free to leave. Secondly, if they have any concerns, they're absolutely free and should contact us and we will deal with that. But if there was a problem at Paramaribo, I don't think the Australian Prime Minister would fly over, or the Australian officials would fly over to Paramaribo. There is a system, and if they want to appeal to us and say that their human rights are being abused in any way, we've given them an utter commitment that we'll follow up on that. But it's an Australian corrections facility.
Is Mr Turnbull delivering on his pledge to speed up that process, though, getting those detainees off Christmas Island?
Well, they're speeding up the process of making sure that the appeals will be heard as rapidly as they can. I haven't got the most recent figures of how many they're working their way through, but they're certainly prioritising New Zealanders, that's my advice. And the second thing is he made it clear that they are free to leave. As I said to you, these people are here, they haven't come back. There were 40 a week or so ago, and I think there's about 40 now, and they haven't come back because they've chosen not to come back. Now, they might have their own perceptions of their own cases being more likely to be positively considered if they're actually on Australian soil than New Zealand soil, but that's not the advice I've had of the way it would work.
Are you confident that that is the reason that they're not back yet? Because Kelvin Davis has said that some of these people are getting denied access to New Zealand Embassy or any kind of legal agency. Presumably that's the way that they would signal that they would come back.
That's right. I mean, they usually have legal representation, and that legal representation can and does make requests through the system. I'm not aware of any that have said, I want to come home, and have had that denied, but, you know, we can go and check on that, but I don't think that's been the case.
Given what's happened today though, why shouldn't the New Zealand Commission on New Zealand representatives go in there and ask people if they want to come back and check on their safety?
Well, as far as I'm aware, I don't think people are under an illusion that they are free to come home. I think that point was actually put to people, and what they seem to say in some of the public comments, except that's not every single person, but seem to say in the public comments were that they didn't trust that system of doing that, or they didn't want to do that. There were a variety of reasons that they actually had. But certainly the lawyers who represent these people, most of them under legal aid, are well and truly aware of the position that they're free to leave Australia.
If there's no Serco staff there, if there's no guards there, if there's no administration there, how are they going to leave though?
Well, there's not nobody on Christmas Island. There's as I understand it, there's an issue in one part of the detention centre, and obviously the Australians are managing that, and sometimes you take time to work your way through that. It's not unusual to retreat from a particular position and to allow things to settle down a little bit. I mean, in New Zealand, we've had people getting on top of roofs and corrections facilities and the likes. We don't, in day one, storm the place. We often do leave it and allow the temperatures to come down a little bit and then try and negotiate our way through.
Don't you accept that it's really difficult for some of those detainees to come back to New Zealand, given that none of them have family or support networks or jobs or homes or anything to come back to? Their lives are in Australia. Do you appreciate that?
Yes, but that's the wider argument why they are much more likely, if that's the case, subject to their actual conviction, to be successful on appeal. So we know that of the people that had been appealing, about a third of them have been successful on appeal because of exactly that. Their community of interest has been Australia. I mean, I'm not defending the Australian policy. My position on it is that I think they should adopt the rules that we have in New Zealand, but that was a position adopted by the Parliament in Australia, and I can't stop that. They have the sovereign right to do it.
So when you say that you'll offer support to people that want to come back to New Zealand, what does that entail?
Well, when they come back to New Zealand, then we have to provide support around those people. So obviously we now have memorandum of understanding, so we can get better information when they're coming, and from there are a range of different things that flow from that.
But will you practically help them to get off Christmas Island? I mean, are MFAT dealing with individuals in detention, or how does
Well,
that work?
not aware of anybody that's actually gone to in fact said they want to leave, but if they did, we'd obviously work alongside them if that's what they said.
Is anybody in touch with anyone in Christmas Island?
I don't have those numbers, I'm sorry.
And then why not be proactive on that? Why not? Why doesn't he?
Well, the position is really clear. I don't think people on Christmas Island are unaware that they are able to leave. I think they're choosing not to leave because their perception is that they'll be treated better and more likely to get a better hearing if they're on Christmas Island. I'm not saying that's correct, but I'm saying that's what their perception must be, otherwise they would leave, because this is not new news that they can leave. Malcolm Turnbull was over here weeks ago and he made it absolutely crystal clear.
Our reporter in Australia says he's spoken to a detainee who said he's done all the paperwork to get out of there and come home to New Zealand as is the offer, and says he's just been waiting and they're only letting about 10 a month come back. Are you sure that if they just say that they can get out? Is that
Well, I can only tell you what I've been told by the Australians. And you were there when the Australian Prime Minister made that assurance. I'm relying on that. If someone wants to come back, then give us his name and we'll make sure it's expedited.
Is New Zealand going to raise any concerns about Australia's treatment of detainees at the UN Human Rights Council overnight?
I wouldn't have thought so. I mean, there are, for some, I don't think the Australians would accept that there are human rights issues, and from New Zealand's point of view, we've said that we'll investigate any that are brought to our attention.
Amnesty International said that New Zealand's been very silent on the issue and also on the people smuggling report they released a couple of weeks ago. Do you think that New Zealand should be speaking up and sort of standing up against Australia and on what they've been seeing as human rights issues?
Well, if we're talking about the same Amnesty report, it was the one in relation to whether Australians had paid boat captains to turn things around. As I said at the time, we have had no advice that happens or doesn't happen. If it did happen, it's a matter for the Australians. I mean, there's certainly been some previous media commentary that happened over successive governments, so it's not new. What we have said is that if a boat turns up in New Zealand's legal territorial waters and we're required to deal with it, we will. It's not our policy to pay people to go back. I don't know what the Australians are doing.
But the treatment of Kiwi detainees in offshore detention centres, you don't think that's a human rights issue?
Well, what I've said is, if someone believes that they are suffering a human rights abuse, there's a process that they can go through of contacting New Zealand officials, and Foreign Affairs will provide consular support for that.
When the Australian media reported those allegations about the Australian authorities paying people to go to take photos back into New Zealand, did you raise, or did the government raise those issues with the Australian government? Did you ask questions? Did you investigate or examine it any further?
Well, I don't know what happened on our end, except in terms of with Australia, except they absolutely made sure that we had received no advice if that had happened, and that was the case. So on the New Zealand side, we weren't aware of it. I haven't raised the issue with what was then Tony Abbott, because in the end it's a matter for Australia how they deal with those matters.
But didn't you feel some concern that potentially they've been paid to send those detainees?
Well, how they deal with all of those issues is an Australian matter because they're in Australian waters. I don't critique their policy.
Sorry, just one last question on Christmas Island.
Yeah.
An Australian lawyer said that he doesn't see any signs of people being processed or it's slowing down. When would you step in here?
How do you mean?
That the process of detainees, it's been slowed down. Like no one's
The process of detainees isn't slowing down. What's happening is the process of dealing with applications for appeals is going to be prioritised and therefore sped up. A, because there are more resources, but B, because New Zealanders, in terms of the appeal process, will get priority, as I understand it.
He doesn't think that's happening though.
Well, I don't have the most recent numbers, but I can go and look at it, and I can't tell you exactly what the pathway was, but the assurance we got from the Australians is they're putting in a lot more resources. We understand, or they understand, the bow wave of people that are created by this. As the Australian Prime Minister said at the time, that actually naturally just deals with itself over time, but the question is how quickly we can deal with those appeals.
Is it your intention, Prime Minister, to still support Australia's bid to get on the United Nations Human Rights Council?
Well, I haven't said advice to countering that.
Will New Zealand make any kind of submission when Australia comes up for its review? It's tomorrow after our time.
I need to check that, I don't know at this point.
Prime Minister, just moving on to another topic, the issue of the naval visit, potential naval visit next year by the United States. What is your position on that as to whether they will have to inform New Zealand if that ship will be nuclear powered?
Okay, so there's a legal process that's followed at the moment, and the effect of that legal process is Foreign Affairs has to be able to provide to me as Prime Minister written assurance that they believe that any vessel or aircraft complies with the law, and that would be the same for any American naval vessel that came to New Zealand. So nothing new will be happening, it's the current process, and I very regularly go through that. So very regularly MFAT will advise me that a French aircraft or a French military ship or whatever is coming to New Zealand ports, and they believe that I can sign the legal documentation I'm required to sign. So in the end, it's not so much a confirm or deny position, but we're not changing our law. The ship would need to comply with our law, and Foreign Affairs would be required to provide advice to me that would allow me to sign it, that would say they're confident that they meet our law.
The Americans have always argued, though, Prime Minister, that it is a neither confirm nor deny issue, and that they say they don't send ships here because they have to compromise.
Yeah, I think it's a lot more nuanced than that. Look, I'm not the technical expert in American, ships and their capability, but I think there's plenty of open source, documentation and qualification that would allow you to form a view. For instance, I don't think anyone's ever argued that a US Coast Guard is either nuclear powered nor nuclear armed. So I mean, there's enough stuff there, depending on the vessel that they send, for an assessment to be made. But whatever way it plays out, they have to meet the New Zealand law. We're not changing the law, but the law gets applied very regularly. It's just that people don't see it all the time.
And would it require, just as you say, could the Ministry of Foreign Affairs use information in the public domain to make an assessment, or would they have to actually get an answer from the United States? No, this is not nuclear power, or could they?
They have to be able to satisfy me as Prime Minister that I can sign sign the documentation and not be in breach of the law. That's the advice they give me. So you don't really see it, but a cover sheet comes to me and says, XYZ vessel is coming to New Zealand over this period of time. It is the belief that is that it meets our law, and I should feel confident that I can sign it.
When they present you with that advice from, on a French vessel or a British or a Chinese, do they actually go to those countries to get an assurance, or do they just use their best judgment?
I can't tell you precisely. It may vary, I don't know.
So,
Foreign Affairs would be able to tell you that.
Would New Zealand have offered that invitation if there was a possibility it's going to be rejected?
Potentially, yes. I mean, what the driving force wasn't to get a US ship to New Zealand, it was to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Navy. And in doing that, it would seem very odd to me that we wouldn't invite the Americans when we would invite many, many other navies from around the world. Whether the US decide to participate or if they don't, and for whatever reasons, ultimately it's something that's got to be worked through. But if you take a step back, I mean, it just strikes me that all of the no one needs a rehearsal of all of the issues, but it strikes me we've sort of worked our way through all those relationships in amazing shape. The last vestiges of any sort of issues around the nuclear issue is really the US ship hasn't been here. So it's in the end, it's sort of up to the Americans if they decide they want to do that, and if they do and they come, it's great. And I think New Zealanders would not all of them, but many of them would celebrate that. But it's a matter for the Americans.
And you would obviously welcome a ship coming here because of that symbolism. If a ship does come,
to me, this sort of debate has been and gone. The Americans have got their own position, they had their own concerns at the time. Appreciate all those. But New Zealand's changed its law. It's not going to alter that law, and successive governments, including mine when I first came into office, or when I first became leader of the opposition actually, and within the first 24 hours confirmed that legislation was staying in place. So look, in the end it'd be great if they come, but if they come, they have to come within the bounds of the current New Zealand law.
And if they do, would you see that, and within those bounds, would you see that as a good symbolic gesture that?
I do, but I don't think it's a test of the relationship. In the end, they decide they don't want to send a ship, then they'll not send me a ship. It doesn't mean our relationship is in tip-top condition. It is. As I think President Bush once said, you know, there was a rock in the road and we've learned our way to work around that rock. But it just sort of strikes me for countries that are so immensely friendly and do so much together, it's probably a bit of a historical issue as opposed to, you know, having to deal with it today. I mean, I wouldn't have thought it's a big deal to, you know, if they send the ship, but you know, I can understand why their system may or may not do that.
But
You've
it could work-
previously
it
said
could
that
work
you'd like it
properly.
to, you've previously said that you'd like it to happen. Would you have preferred that the Americans actually requested it rather than the New Zealand government have to send an invitation?
No, I don't think it's really. I don't think it matters who or how it came about. It just has come about. As I said, it would be illogical for us not to invite them on the basis that they might say no, because there's probably a reasonable chance they might say yes. We don't know. We haven't gone and tested the waters and said, if we send you this invitation, will you definitely say yes? Because we won't send you an invitation if we know you're going to say no. We genuinely don't know.
But John Kerry's raised it a couple of times with Murray McCulley.
Sorry, one more time.
John Kerry has raised it a couple of
Yep.
times with Murray McCulley this year, so wasn't that a signal that they would be keen to?
Well, I think there's no question that the relationship just continues to move from strength to strength, and people look at it as something which is a little bit historical in the relationship, and we're about looking forward. So it is, let's be blunt, you know, pretty symbolic. That's about it. But in the end, you know, it's up to them to decide. If they decide in the end that they can't meet, or with our people can't be satisfied that they can meet the law, then the ship wouldn't be coming, and so be it. You know, the world's going to move on, but my preference would be to normalise the relationship.
So
with
Prime
everyone.
Minister-
Prime Minister.
Sorry?
What would you put the odds at them accepting?
Honestly, don't know. I think they're working their way through the issue at the moment.
If you meet with President Obama at APEC
Yep.
away next week, would you raise this issue with him and ask him if he's willing?
Probably not, on the basis that he'll eventually get advice. I imagine it'll just sort of flow up to him at some point. So the president will have to make a call. But I don't. If I go and raise the matter with him, it looks like it's the biggest issue that we're facing, and it's not. I mean, in the end, it's for the Americans to decide whether they want to send the ship.
So, Prime Minister, in the scenario where the United States accepts the invitation, but then sticks to its position of refusing to confirm or deny whether the ship is nuclear powered, but foreign
But it's really important to understand that the law isn't that we go and ask someone to confirm.
Yeah.
The law is that the Prime Minister of the day has to be able to believe that New Zealand is complying with its own legislation, and the only way that Foreign Affairs would provide that advice to me is when they are absolutely confident that that's the case. How they achieve that level of confidence is a matter for Foreign Affairs.
Yes.
But it isn't a matter of us necessarily asking the Americans. There are many ways they could do that.
Yeah,
Is it
so that's my
sometimes-
question. You'd be happy, you know, if the United States didn't confirm or deny, but Foreign Affairs came to you and said, this is okay, this ship is not nuclear powered, you would be okay to sign that piece of paper?
On their advice, but they would have to be absolutely confident that's correct. They will never provide that advice to me unless they're confident.
Would you support giving councils more power to override NIMBY residents on issues like densification, as Labour's proposed?
Well, I think generally from what I can see, you know, we've already been doing that stuff. I mean, I've been making the comment for months and months on end that actually when it comes to Auckland, it'll need to both go out and go up. And it is doing a combination of those things, and actually there is intensification on the unitary plan.
Productivity Commission says this is a problem as well with community groups and so forth having too much, or existing residents having too much power over the planning process.
Well, there's always a sort of arm wrestle that goes on, isn't there, between you know, the rights and interests of existing residents and others who might be interested in undertaking, you know, development or whatever in a particular part of Auckland or a particular part of New Zealand. It's not new, but you know, for the most part, we work our way through it. But you know, there are always issues.
Mr. Key, is the government concerned about what is essentially Chinese state propaganda from radio stations in Auckland? This is in relation to a Reuters report last week which showed that the Chinese government's covert control of radio stations around the world, including in Auckland.
Well, I don't have the details of the actual direct engagement of the Chinese government in particular broadcasting or radio assets that it may or may not own. I mean, in the end, you know, it's not against the law. I mean, Radio New Zealand broadcasts out to part of the world, and they're 100% owned by New Zealand. Now they have complete editorial independence, but they're free to do that. It's not a law that stops that.
Is this something you're going to be looking at further, or looking at their operations?
Well, I mean, in the end, if the Chinese government owned a radio station and that radio station pumped out, their messages, I don't think we'd actually stop that, because ultimately I think it would be against freedom of speech, even if we disagree with it.
But do you have any concerns that it's covert, that it's owned by the Chinese government, but they've hid it under private companies?
Well, I haven't seen anything to support that.
Okay.
Prime Minister, will you be raising the flag issue when you meet with Prince Charles tonight?
Probably. I think I've already discussed it with him, actually, but
What did he say about it?
I can't answer that question. But I mean, but the position of the royal family is that they're quite comfortable with whatever decision New Zealanders make. And I think of the 53 countries that used to have the Union Jack in the corner of their flag or on their flag, only 3 of them now do.
Prime Minister, have you decided what flag you will vote for when voting opens on November the 20th?
Pretty sure I'm going to vote for the Coal Lockwood blue and black one.
Just back on Christmas Island, just on the latest one, the Australian Federal Police say the detention centre is too dangerous for them for fire service to enter, despite it being ablaze. Does that raise your level of concern about Kiwis in there?
Yeah, it's not that I don't have concerns. What I'm saying is it's an Australian corrections facility, so there's nothing I can do about that. They have the legal and moral responsibility to deal with the issue as best that they can see. There's nothing I can practically do on that front. I'm just talking about the longer term issues of New Zealanders on Christmas Island. My preference would be, that they come back to New Zealand, because I think they'd have a better pathway than currently sitting where they are, but I can't make them do that.
Prime Minister, on TPP, what do you see as being the timetable for select committee hearings and passage through the New Zealand Parliament?
I don't have the advice on that. I'm sure we can get that from the Trade Minister's office. It'll probably go to Foreign Affairs Select Committee, I'm sure, but it'll work its way through it. I mean, there'll be, we're not rushing things. I think it'll be a reasonable time for people to look at it and debate.
Prime Minister, on that, do you think that there will be required any vote in the Parliament on the foreign buyers ban? Would that be needed, or is that something that's not needed?
There'll likely be, as a consequence of TPP being ratified, there'll be legislation that's required as a result of it, but I haven't received the individual advice of what legislation is required.
On what different bits are required or not? What did you make of Labour leader Andrew Little's position on the Trans-Pacific Partnership?
Well, I'm none the wiser than I was on Friday when they went to the conference. So, look, at the end, who knows? But in a way, who cares? I mean, realistically, this is a deal that will see New Zealanders getting access to 40% of the global economy with a 93% tariff elimination. It's worth billions of dollars to New Zealand. Whether the Labour Party has a position on it or ever actually articulate one's a bit irrelevant, really.
Sure. And just very quickly.
On the carbon accent, sorry.
Yep.
Have you met with James Cameron this year? Did he lobby you at all this year on that issue?
Not this year. Well, unless he's written to my office name. So I haven't seen James Cameron this year. I know he's been certainly a strong proponent of wanting to turn it into ocean sanctuary. So have lots of people.
Prime Minister, why do you prefer the Kyle Lockwood blue and black over the
Green.
Kyle Lockwood, the one?
The red and black. The red and blue.
Red and blue. What made you choose the?
I've seen a bit of the stylised stuff on it, and I quite like it. And I like the particular blue that's on the blue and black. But it's just personal choice. The red and blue as the blue and black one as opposed to the red and blue. I like the blue on the red and on the black. Get it right.
Minister, can I ask, there was a theory kicking around the Labour Party conference that the TPP text was conveniently released in time for their conference. What's your response to that?
They have an overinflated view of their own conference if they think we could organise 12 countries to release it on that day. But next time I'm speaking to Obama, I'll let him know that the Labour Party in New Zealand believe that he's working against them or for them or some way for them. Yeah, no, not out of our control, I'm afraid. Okay, see you later.